Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, today we have Jason with us, but before we introduce Jason, we need to know, are you prepared to engage?
Yes, I am, sir.
So Jason Bodnar, is that how it's pronounced?
Yes, it is.
So Jason Bodnar has been teaching high school science for 13 years and enjoys spending time with his 5-year-old daughter when he isn't designing games or running the board game club at school. He also loves playing the piano and going to concerts. Jason recently, or actually not necessarily recently, he started Engage Games at around a year ago with the goal of developing games that help students become engaged in content in a fun and unique way. And something I'm not reading here, but I'm guessing it's also true, is that you enjoy teaching a lot as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. I love teaching to death.
Great. So Jason, is there anything we're missing from that intro?
No, that pretty much covers it.
Fantastic. So Jason, we're always curious to understand what the life of our guests looks like. So can you tell us, Jason, what does a regular day, regular week, what does Jason Bodnar today, being Jason Bodnar in a day like today, look like? What does it feel like?
Sure. So I teach in Indiana. I teach in Northeast Indiana. I've taught science, like you said, for about 13 years. So a typical day is I get to school. I'm not very much a morning person, so I'm not one to be running 10 miles at 5 in the morning. I get to school. I teach regular physics, AP physics, computer science, and an advanced topics class with my friend. So I've been lucky enough to teach all sorts of science and like I said, kind of develop my own class, which kind of fits my personality, as you can tell, since I'm trying to build this company. I go through my typical day. I also help with the speech team. So I sometimes have practice after school. And like you also mentioned, I run the board game club. I know that's not terribly surprising that I'm into board games since I'm trying to make some. But yeah, I have over like 100 games in my classroom. So it's not an average looking classroom. I go home and I hopefully get to see my daughter that day and hang out with my dog and ride my bike. And like you said, I also love playing the piano. And then I try to get some sleep and start all over. So that's basically it.
Busy days. Of
course, yep.
So, Jason, can you tell us a story of a time that you were, either using a board game or a game or, creating your games, and you set out to do something, to create an experience for your students, and, things went south. It didn't work as you were expecting. Something went wrong, because we want to be there in the ground level with you. We want to live that experience with you and learn from whatever it is that you took from that. Do you have such a story?
Yeah, I think just the development of my game element poker is a good story about that. When you start out to try something new, trying a game, whether a game's already established or you think, I can do this, I can make my own game. It takes a lot of patience, and high schoolers don't have a lot of patience. But I asked my students when I taught chemistry the last couple years to basically kind of step in as playtesters for me. My target audience are basically people that age and up. And obviously, if my students don't feel like it's a fun game, it's going to fall flat on its face. And that's exactly what it did. When I started testing out the game on them, they were confused by it. It had too many. Basically, when you see the game online, you'll see that it's got icon in the corner. Well, I started with 2 icons. And like a lot of things that I tend to do, as a science person, sometimes you feel like, this needs this added to it, or, you tend to be too complex, and games need to be simple in the classroom. I also have that problem in my, it's kind of a side note, but in my board game club, I've bought so many, 5-hour games that just don't get played in my board game club. They look pretty on the shelf, but they don't do the job when kids are only there for a couple hours. So, just the development process when you're trying something, the students at least recognized that I was trying something new. They were getting to be part of a process that most students probably aren't. It's pretty rare that a teacher says, okay, today you're going to test out this game I made. That in itself creates an environment where the students have a lot of say in what's going on, and they see that I value their opinion. And it was pretty terrible. They were just like, first of all, the students, some of them don't know how to play poker, so that's a little bit of a hump to get over. But that should be about it. They shouldn't be sitting there for 20 minutes. I don't even know who won this hand, what's going on. You're just basically defeating the entire purpose. So they helped me really refine it, and it's been really cool to have the game out there now on Kickstarter and show students my finished prototype, how they were able to really get me from A to B. So that was really cool.
So I'm guessing that your students will be pretty excited when the game is actually, like whether in the company or whatever it is that happens with the game, when they see it out there. I'm sure that there's going to be quite a few that say, well, I was one of the initial play testers of that professor, of that teacher, Jason Bodnar, who has all these games now and so on. So I'm sure it's going to be an experience to remember for each and every one of them.
Yeah, I hope so. I think so. When I showed them the copy of that I have now, they're like, "Wow, that's pretty cool." It looks like a real game. It doesn't look like you printed it off at home type thing. So that's a big deal, to kids to see something like that. And I also just want to model for them that they can do something like that too. We live in a really cool time when you can create something a lot easier than before. You don't have to, really hire somebody out or go pleading to the whole world. It's nice if somebody picks up on your product, but it's just really cool that we can start things up on our own now, and hopefully students kind of take value in that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that going back to your story and how the complexity was something that you struggled with, and it's typical because you have to think that when we're creating something for our students, your level of understanding is going to be a lot greater on the subject than your students usually. I teach at a business school, so sometimes we do get the odd student in the sense that they know more about the topic than the facilitator. Because, for example, you're discussing a company and the student might have worked or is working in that company and so on. But in general, you tend to have a lot of, a deeper understanding on the topic. And it's hard just for regular teaching, let alone creating a game, to reduce that complexity to get them to, to be able to understand and get the whole point of why and how you're doing this. And even further, one of the things when I work, where I work, we create interactive learning experiences as well. And one of the things to get the experts like down to that level of, what you want to achieve is something pretty specific. And it's a very typical experience that you say, well, but this could also be used for this and for that and for that and that all that and used for the whole year. And at least what we try to do pretty often is say, look, focus on what it is, like what is the class you want to use it in. And in your case, it could be the session or the unit, the whole unit, but focus on that. And then, if there's opportunities to use it elsewhere, that would be great. But initially you have to make sure it's hitting exactly on those targets. And it's a lot easier if, as you said, you simplify it and you take it down to that level where you're really hitting that target real hard and it's making sense for your students. So I think it's a fantastic learning experience that you had there.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's kind of funny that you say it that way because I had a student today, students jump from one class to another and they tend to, kind of continue what they're used to. And I had a student who's used to writing really long essays. And I didn't want them to write a really long essay. I wanted them to be short and to the point. And another class I have, students sometimes get up in front of the class and do presentations. And they just have endless words on the slide and they just read it word for word. And it's like, no, we want it shorter. And they're like, what? And it's like, yeah, like life, is more efficient when you get to the point and you're not just bleeding out of the edges all the time and basically constantly rambling like I am doing now.
There you go. So, Jason, let's give it a 180-degree spin and go actually for a time where, you had this whatever challenge you were facing in your class, or you wanted to do something different, and you use either, element poker or any other game or board game you've been using in your class. And, you actually, you went for it and you succeeded at that one because we heard the story of how you were able to manage to turn around the initial failure of element poker. Maybe another story of something that you did in your class and what you experienced from that or in the game club or the board game club, or whatever that was. Do you have a story you can tell us?
Yeah. So just like anything else, I think with the board game club, I've really learned kind of how to do that efficiently. Like I said, I do have a lot of games that don't get played. But what I've done is I've got some leaders in the club now, and they will take one of my more complex games home and learn it and bring it back to the club and teach the rest of the kids. And so what's been neat is, just empowering students. Last year, it didn't go as well when I had them try to design a game on their own. To be honest with you, I know this wouldn't be surprising, but I'd love to have a board game design class. I don't think my high school is going to approve that tomorrow, but we can all continue to dream. But I've really learned that it's not always about me. And here's this game that I think is cool. What do the kids think is cool? So they'll bring in their own games. They'll take my games home, and that in itself shows that I'm trusting these kids. I mean, I have them take home, fairly expensive games sometimes, and that in itself has just been really rewarding. They bring other kids. They say, "Hey, look what I've learned," and I've really, really enjoyed that.
So what I'm gathering from that story is that your big success was allowing, empowering your students in that sense to take their games, to create their own things in class. And what would you say is a key learning from that? Of course, I'm guessing that one of that is going to be, empowering your students and giving them greater responsibility that is in the end is usually going to be translated into them, stepping up and trying to go for it. But what would you attribute that to? Like, what would you say maybe is a key to achieving that? Because it's not, it sounds straightforward, but I'm guessing it's not that direct as well.
Well, a couple of things with that I think are just being able to take risks and again kind of modeling that for my students and building the relationships with those kids. Whether you have a club or not, my students I think know that I treat them like a human. They're not just another person in a seat. They have something to offer my class. Just today I had a student that lately has been falling asleep in my class, and I know that's hard to believe because I'm so interesting. I'm kidding. But, students come to class and they have different things going on. And I know that teachers approach that in a different way. But I pulled the student to the side. He informed me that he's been staying up till 3, text his friends. And that'll basically cause anybody to fall asleep when they've gotten 3 hours of sleep, that night. And so, I approach it like I'm not going to call your mom until this continues to be a problem. And then we'll go from there. But I treat him like a young adult. And that in itself, separating ourselves from the games and everything that we're focused on today is really the key of everything. I love working with high school students. They've still got a lot of growth to go through, but they have a lot to offer. And it's just extremely rewarding. We live in an interesting time, and I know that you're not in our country right now, but it's an interesting time in our country in general. And teachers have it tough sometimes. I'm pretty lucky with my position, and I'm constantly telling other people that they should consider getting into education because even though there are challenges, it can be a really, really awesome career.
Absolutely, and I'm not trained as an educator itself. I'm an engineer and an MBA, and now I'm teaching as well here in Madrid at IE Business School. And it's something I don't know. I think it's a passion or an interest I've had for a pretty long time. And when I saw the opportunity to work at a university, I jumped at it. Like, this sounds amazing. And it was also like the opportunity itself was very, very interesting. But the fact that it was within a university setting, a place for learning, for, understanding all of these things, I thought it was especially appealing to me. But I would also say that not everybody is hardwired to be so excited about this. I think there's different types of people as well. And maybe not everybody is that interested in that. But I do think it is a very rewarding experience, even if you're not going to live all your life teaching. I do think it's something that most people should experience at one point or another. I agree completely with that on that point with you, Jason.
Yeah, and it's really neat that you're able to work at a university. People have asked me if I want to do that, and I think I probably won't, just because, like I said, I've been really able to connect with these students and have had a great experience. And continue to kind of change my class load, which keeps things fresh for me. So I've really liked that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, there's many different levels in education, but I mean, we've been talking both about, one of your failures, which turned out to be Element Poker, which is, now a successful campaign in Kickstarter. But we've also talked about how you empowered your students. But I would like to know if you're going to, again, when you were creating Element Poker, maybe, or what the way you would be thinking about creating your next game, or how did you, think about bringing games to your class? I would like to know if there's any sort of mental process that you go through when you're going to do. I mean, pick one of these things, the one that you feel is maybe more structured or that you have clearer, and tell us like how do you go about it? What's your your inner thoughts when you're doing these things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I started getting into board games, which wasn't really terribly long ago, it's kind of that same thing where I thought I could make something. It's not that complicated, and it ended up being very complicated. I set out to create kind of a chemistry lab game. And instead of just a card game, it was a full board. There was so many pieces going on, and it was just too much. And I learned quickly that in order to design something effectively, and especially when you're starting on a lower budget, you've got to start simple. And it just so happened that I've loved poker for a long time. It's a pretty simple game. It only takes 52 cards. And I thought to myself, okay, it's like anything else. Let's just see what's out there. And the game that I created, and I wanted to create, didn't seem like it was out there at all. And so I wanted to try to go that route. And it took a long time to figure out kind of just the ins and outs and how exactly that would look. But my thought process was just, explore. I've got so many games in my room, but there's just thousands of games out there to find. And again, we just live in a really cool time where it's easy as can be to see, what's out there. And, I got a couple of other, you're probably familiar with Genius Games. I've checked out, some of the stuff that they've done. I used to volunteer for them when I had the opportunity. And, you really kind of get down to the nitty gritty and say to yourself, what do I want to make? Is it possible for me to do this without breaking the bank? And you try, and you just keep trying and see, is it going to accomplish your goal? And it's exactly gets back to what you said. I think you can create a pretty simple game that can accomplish things in a matter of minutes instead of having to have some huge rule book. And by then, the students or even any regular player is just going to be disconnected if they don't have the time to dig into that. So, it's not completely like upper level calculus. It's just really just setting down what's your objective. Make sure that you tweak that objective if it's too complicated. Try and keep reaching out to other experts out there. I've listened to I've enjoyed your podcast. What I've checked out of it recently. I'm a podcast addict. I'm a learning addict. So I'm on YouTube all the time. I'm on podcasts all the time, Twitter, wherever I can learn from people that have gone through this process. Board Game Geek is a really great place. People are out there to help, and they're not asking for anything in return. And so I'm really grateful to all those people that helped me along the way.
Great, and you were mentioning right now you're going to all these places, and it reminded me. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this live, but the episodes of Professor Game go directly to a YouTube channel. So if you type Professor Game in YouTube, you'll probably find some of them. They don't have a visual; it's just going to be the logo of the podcast, but they are available there as well. I'm sure
Awesome.
There's more people listening to it through podcasts, but if you want to find it on YouTube, it's also available right there. And Jason, when you're creating all of these things, is there any recommendation that you would give somebody who is thinking about doing something like this, like creating a game for their class, maybe even in the future considering, building a company or whatever with those games? What would you recommend to them? What should they do? Like play a lot of games, or I don't know. Is there any quick advice you could give them?
Yeah, it kind of comes back to what I was saying. I would say play games. See, think in your head what do you want to start with? And if you were going to start with anything, I would just recommend a very simple card game. And once you are successful at developing that, you've tested it and it works. Now you've got something to build. I've always been a big dreamer, and I thought to myself, I've got a really awesome space game idea. which is still kind of burning in the back of my head. But that's not something that you can sit down and create and sell, in 10 minutes. So that's a really nice thing to have that end goal in mind. Whether you're creating a game for your class or beyond, obviously is going to make a big difference. But like I said, there's so many resources out there, and I do want to offer myself as a resource. Anybody can contact me. My company is, again, Engage Games, and we're at Engage Games on Twitter, Instagram. The website's engagegames.net, and more than happy to help anybody that has any questions. I only feel like that's right? When other people have helped me, that I can kind of pay that forward. But I'm not the only one. There's literally hundreds of people out there. Jamie Stegmeyer is the head of Stonemeyer Games. His website is just phenomenal as far as resources for people designing games. Another podcast, the Board Game Design Lab, is really, really good. If you look, you're going to find it, right? It's not hidden nowadays. There's no password, and they're all free. So it's just a matter of time and sitting down and thinking, figuring out for yourself, are you better learning on a YouTube video, or do you want to listen to podcasts? Do you want to do both? Do you want to read blogs? Or do you just want to talk to somebody? And you can tell I like talking, and I'd be happy to help somebody if somebody was interested.
So there you go, Engagers. Snatch the opportunity if you're thinking about building anything in that realm. Probably reach out to Engage Games. That will be Jason, and make your question.
Yeah, I'd be happy to help.
Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification.
So Jason, what is something that you think any, game-based learning or, using a game in your class or creating a game for your class or even gamification project could benefit from? Is there sort of a best practice or, again, some strategy or way of thinking about this that you think could help almost in any kind of project in this sense?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to gamification, start small, start simple, try one thing, and don't give up. Whether you're in the high school or even in the university or elementary level, obviously, kids love games like crazy, but we get kind of away from that mindset as people get older. I just turned 40 and I love games, and I'm not ashamed of that. And I remember a lot of my university classes, and they weren't enthralling, and we didn't play games. You listened to lecture, you had some discussion and things like that.
After lecture, after lecture, after lecture.
Right, exactly. It's just like, what year is it? I mean, you can recognize that people learn different ways, and if everything is predictable to your students, then you're not captivating them. If they know what they're going to get every time they walk in, then you're not going to keep their interest. And even just literally one game a year is better than zero. It shows that you're willing to let the students have fun while they can learn. There is such a thing. There's obviously, things like Kahoot and like review games out there, but you really take it to another level when the kids gather around. And, I have kind of bigger black tables in my room because it's a science room where students sit in groups of 4. And in that in itself creates kind of a group atmosphere. And when I hand them something like Element Poker to check out, I mean, you can just see them just get excited. I mean, that's just not the norm in school. And so, it's not really more complicated than just give it a try. And obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you already kind of have the right mindset and push yourself. And I'm included in that. I get stuck in ruts. I teach the same way sometimes. I'm like, why haven't I done X, Y, or Z? And so this is kind of a message for myself too. That it's never really yeah. It's a little bit weird, right? I'm talking to myself a little too much, but you can never really be done with the journey. And I think that's true in life, and that's true in teaching.
That's it. There you go. And Jason, after listening to these questions and the whole vibe of the podcast, is there somebody that comes to your mind that you would like to listen to in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
Oh man, what a good question. Like I said before, I've worked with Genius Games before, and the head of that company is a really great guy. His name's John Covey. They're doing some really cool things. He's been helpful in my process as well. So I guess he's probably towards the top of my list because he used to teach too, and so that's been pretty inspiring to me to see that another a science teacher could develop something that's been that successful for him. He's not in the classroom anymore. He's running around the world. I think Eschenspiel in Germany is happening right now. So that's pretty cool to think that somebody can turn something into that and run with it. I'm not saying that's going to be me, but at the same time, it's inspiring that it can start off something small. One small game can turn into a full-fledged company.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's sounds like a very interesting person to talk to from Genius Games. So we'll see if we can get a handle and see if he can be in the podcast. And in that same sense of recommendations, Jason, if you had to recommend one book to the engagers, what book would that be and why?
Oh boy. And I love to read, but the funny thing is I don't have a lot of books on this topic. Can it be anything, or does it need to be related to this?
Ideally, it's for people catering to the audience. But if you want to recommend something else, maybe imagination. There was somebody who was saying like read nonfiction, not only nonfiction but also read fiction, and see how worlds are created and get curious about that, which is also a very important element in many games.
Yeah, well, actually, something that does relate to this. So I mentioned earlier the Board Game Design Lab podcast. Gabe Barrett is the one that runs that. He actually compiled a book called the Board Game Design Lab, I believe, advice book, and that was really helpful to me, if nothing else, to find out what other people are out there. They're the experts in the field, and not a 10,000 page book that'll take you forever to get through, but has page after page of advice from some of the experts in the field. That it's a great other resource that's still on my shelf. So I do have something about games, right? So I don't have to throw out some really random complicated fiction at you that doesn't really connect to what we're talking about.
Jason, what would you say is your superpower when creating these games or using games in the classroom?
I don't know if I hope it's a superpower. I guess just being fun. I think I hope that. I don't know if that's that unique, but just kind of taking on that mentality that everything can be fun while you're still doing something unique. Just in my last class today, we did a mock trial of the future. So I'm not going to ramble about it for forever because it doesn't directly relate. But long story short, we had the potential court case of an advanced AI claiming to be human. And so it took the stand today. And as of course, a student, not an actual robot, and kind of went to bat for itself in defending its own rights. And so just doing stuff like that keeps things fresh for me, keeps things fresh for your students, and they have a lot of fun debating each other. Kids like to argue. I know that's not news to your audience either. And when they can argue in a productive way, that's really neat to see. That's, like I said, another reason why I love being part of the speech team. So I don't know if that's a superpower, being fun. I get maybe just the risk taking that's involved in that, and being willing to say, this could flop on its face, but it's worth a try. And worst case scenario, kids know that you're trying something different, and they appreciate that.
Very, very good. So now comes probably what many guests have said is the most difficult question of the podcast, and it is, what is your favorite game?
It's always a fluid thing because, like I said, I keep just buying too many games. But right now, I would probably have to say I've really gotten into unmatched games. Battle of Legends is a pretty simple game. My kids in the board games love it, and we play it almost every Friday night with my friends. So not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's just a dueling game with cards. It's something a lot simpler. It doesn't cost hundreds of dollars. It doesn't take 8 hours. And I'm trying to kind of steer myself away from those, invest the rest of your night type games into something that people can kind of get at. So that one was just released. Again, that's Unmatched, Battle of Legends. My friend bought it at Gen Con, and we can't stop playing it. And finally, I ordered my own copy for Board Game Club. So
there you go. So that's your favorite game. That was even though you mentioned that it's kind of fluid, it goes back and forth, but that's your answer. There you go. And now we're going to jump into a random question that we have, and we haven't had it in a while. So this is going to be exciting for the audience. And this question comes from Alfonso Gonzalez. So Alfonso, he says, one thing I'd like to hear more about is how to, or ways to, show that your students are learning and not just playing games in a game-based learning lesson or unit, or not just turning our classroom into a game in a gamified example. I know that those who are either not gamers or not knowledgeable about game-based learning and gamification will question what students in those environments are actually learning and how we can prove it. So what would you say to that? Again, gathering from Element Poker and all the experience you've had with games in your classroom.
Yeah, first off, I'd say that's a really, really good question. I recognized when I taught before, we had got shiny new iPads in the classroom. And just like anything else, it's a tool. And it can lead to some really cool experiences. But then I stepped back and I was like, I don't know that the kids are really learning anything. I think if I was approached by an administrator and they said, wow, that's kind of cool that you're doing that, what are they learning? I would have a tough time answering that, And so I try to be more intentional about that in general in the classroom. And one of the ways that I've been intentional about that is having students journal. Instead of just, here's a multiple choice test, you answer these questions and hopefully you can answer 8 out of 10 right. One of the best ways that, for example, with that mock trial, we've been able to demonstrate what the students have gotten out of that is having them journal through that process. That's a little bit more abstract, of course. I get that people have tests that they want to take. They have standards that they need to cover. And so what I would say is, come back to what's the objective of that game? If that game seems like a fun game, but it doesn't really tie into what you want students to learn, then it shouldn't probably be played too often. And then I would say, based on your objectives, how are you going to question what the students got out of it? Can they journal, thoroughly what they learned through that game? Can they do better on an assessment if that's what you're looking for? Can they turn that into a project? Obviously, there's many different ways to assess and see what they've accomplished from that. But that is a really, really good question. And like I said, I was guilty of just, here's this shiny new toy. Check this out. The kids have a big smile on their face, but they might as well be at home playing with that. So, yeah, I would just say, come back to what your objective is. Is your objective something like the students become more familiar with relationships on the periodic table and can explain those? Then hopefully a game like Element Poker can help them out. If your objective is something completely different, they shouldn't be playing Element Poker. I'd love for them to, but that's not really going to get them from A to B. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense.
That makes a lot of sense. So actually thinking about what those objectives are and how to grade students, and that's a whole completely new discussion of, the whole standardizing and tests are not tests and all of that. But we're not going to get into that, at least not today, Jason, because we're running out of time. And I wanted to know if you have any quick final piece of advice you want to leave us with. If not, just jump directly into your mention again your social media, your webpage where we can find you, and we'll end it here.
Yeah, no, I don't have a ton of advice. That I'd be kind of repetitive at this point. I tend to, like I said, I ramble a little bit. But I first just want to say thank you very much, Rob, for having me on the show. We had a little bit of a tough time getting connected, and then my technology wasn't working, ironically. So thank you a ton for squeezing me in. It has been really fun talking with you about this, and it's challenged me to think about some things in a different way, which I really appreciate. But other than that, yeah, the company again is Engage Games. My first product is Element Poker, wrapping up on Kickstarter. The website is simply www.element.poker. So that will take you directly to currently my company website as well as the game on Kickstarter. Really appreciate any support out there to help kind of spread this all around the world. That's why I love the internet. I'm talking to you. You're in Spain. It's just a really cool thing to be able to connect with people. And so if you don't want to support the game right now or ever, that's okay. If you just want to talk about games or designing your own game, let me know. Engage Games, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the normal ones, I guess, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you very much, Jason, for investing this time in talking with me, with the engagers, talking about your experience, how's it going. And I really enjoyed having you today as well, because it's not always about, the top expert that has, 10 books and knows everything about what he's doing right now. And this is a relatively new field in many ways. It's also about, experiences like yours. You're creating your first game. You've used games in your class a couple of times and see how that goes and what we can learn from your experience. And I think that's very valuable as well. So thank you for being today with us. However, for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Thanks very much for having me.
Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more details of this interview with Jason Bodnar, all you have to do is go to Professor Game, type Jason in the search bar, and you will definitely find this episode. There, you can also subscribe, and that way we can be in contact and you will have exclusive access to opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And in fact, if you're even considering going to Gamification Europe in Berlin this December, coming up soon, the Engagers, as you know, get a special treatment. You can go directly to professorgame.com/gamificationeurope and get your discount. Do you want to know what are the chemicals in the brain involved in engagement, and what do we have in common as humans, and how does that all relate to games, gamification, and engagement? And all you have to do is subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.